Let's talk about a trend that sounds empowering, but is quietly becoming a breeding ground for toxic behaviour. It's the rise of self-care as a spiritual bypass, the use of healing language to avoid accountability. You've seen it. I'm just protecting my peace. I'm doing what's best for my mental health, and I need to cut off anything that doesn't serve me. At face value, that sounds reasonable, even healthy, but in some cases, not all, this is not self-care. This is selfishness in disguise. There's a difference between caring for yourself and using self-care as a shield to avoid being called out, showing up, or facing hard conversations. Real self-care is nourishing, but weaponized self-care? That's about control. It says, I don't owe you a response. I don't need to explain. I can walk away from this because your emotions are inconvenient. It sounds like strength, but it's often emotional immaturity hiding under a yoga mat and a handful of mantras. So I'd like you to imagine a thief is wearing a soft hoodie that says good vibes only. They're stealing from you time, energy, emotional safety, but doing it with a smile, a candle burning, and a quote from Brené Brown. You feel confused because how can someone be talking about vibrations and alignment and be causing so much harm? But that's the trick. They're using the language of growth to actually avoid growth. Here's how you spot when someone is using self-care as a license to be selfish. They cut people off without communication, but call it protecting energy. They avoid responsibility for harm, but they say they're honoring their truth. And they ignore others' emotions, but claim they're setting boundaries. And they dismiss your pain, but say you're projecting. They make decisions that affect others, but refuse feedback under the guise of doing what's best for them. These are not acts of healing, these are acts of avoidance. A lot of this stems from a real place where people who have been burnt, overextended, abandoned, or raised in chaotic environments. So when they finally find empowerment, they cling to it, but instead of using it to heal in connection, they use it to create emotional isolation and superiority. They become emotionally untouchable. They become people who say, I don't need anyone. I don't do drama. I'm not explaining myself to anybody. And that's not self-care. That's emotional shutdown. The difference between boundaries and brick walls, let's be very clear, boundaries are mutual. They protect your well-being without punishing others. But what many call the boundaries are actually brick walls, designed to push people away, avoid discomfort, and stay emotionally unchecked. You can set a boundary and still have compassion. You can say no and still be kind. And you can prioritize your peace without making others feel like the problem. True healing never requires you to dehumanize the people around you. So the solution? Return to emotional accountability. And here's the truth. If your healing creates distance, silence, blame, and ego, you're not healing. You're protecting a wound instead of working through it. And the way to shift that? Firstly, ask yourself, am I avoiding or am I evolving? If you keep saying, I don't need this every time someone challenges you, you're avoiding. Next, notice your language. Are you using buzzwords to shut people down instead of opening up meaningful dialogue? Thirdly, take ownership. You can absolutely choose space, solitude, or silence, but own it as a choice, not as a moral high ground. Then, stop making growth a performance. Healing doesn't need an anesthetic, it needs humility. And the litmus tests, are people safer after you heal? Here's the big question. Are people around you feeling safer or smaller since you began your self-care journey? Real healing softens your edges. It makes you more accountable, not less. More compassionate, not more dismissive. more available for love, not allergic to intimacy. You know you're healing when you don't need to constantly explain how healed you are. So let's be honest. Self-care is not a free pass to ignore the impact that you have on others. It's not a justification for ghosting, gaslighting, or neglect, and it's not a spiritual cloak to cover your avoidance. The people who do the real work, who sit in discomfort, reflect on their behaviour, have hard conversations, they don't need to post about it. They just live it. And in my closing thoughts, if your self-care turns you into someone others have to recover from, that's not healing, it's harm in a prettier outfit.